Mom? Mom! What the? Mom!
Hey, child, I can lick it, I can ride it while you slipping and sliding. Can do all them little tricks and keep the dick up inside it. You can smack it, you can grip it, you can go down and kiss it. And every time he leave me alone, he always tell me he miss it. He wanna
Saudi Arabia shocking the world. They recently revealed their new metropolis, which is named The Line. The entire city will be piled up to a height of 500 meters. That surpasses the Empire State Building in height. It will span 170 kilometers over the desert, which would require walking for almost 40 hours to complete. There will be a mirror-like glass wall surrounding the entire city. In this Line city, 9 million people are expected to reside. This city won't have any automobiles. They will substitute AI transportation systems instead. They claim that it takes less than 20 minutes to travel anywhere in the city. In this one city, people will spend the entirety of their lives with their families, in their houses, and at work. In this metropolis, you'll find everything you could possibly need, including hospitals, schools, and businesses. But do you believe that this is a wise decision?
I spent a weekend with one of the most notorious killers in Texas. So in my early 20s, I spent a lot of time in South Texas in women's prisons units helping people find forgiveness and second chances at life. And on this one particular weekend, when we arrived, the correctional officers informed our team that there was a new inmate on the premises. She was only 17 years old and had been tried and convicted as an adult for a very violent crime. And because I was the youngest person on our prison team, they voted me to be the one to work with her because she was young, I was young, and she might relate to me and open up to me. Now, I had a rule for myself when I worked with these women to never look up their crimes. I didn't want it to affect my judgment about them or to affect my willingness to help them, so that was just a rule that I always kept. So the correctional officers, they walked me down this long corridor into a classroom where sitting at the table was Erin Caffey. Now, Erin Caffey is a tiny thing. Now, I'm a tiny person, and I dwarfed her. She's very small, very timid, very soft-spoken, rarely will look you in the eye. And my first thought whenever I lay eyes on her and I sit down across from her is, how can somebody this small and this timid possibly be convicted as an adult for a violent crime? What violence is she possibly capable of? Little did I know. We started talking and we kind of started to get to know each other a little bit, cracked a few jokes. I tried to get her to lighten up. And eventually she did start kind of opening up to me, and she started volunteering some details about her version of what had happened the night of her crime. And I have to admit, even though I had a rule to really try not to know what people had done, I was very curious because, again, here's this tiny little thing. She's 17 years old, looks scared to death, and she's in this facility. And well, her version of the events that took place the night of the crime led me to believe that she was a victim in all of it and that it was really out of her hands. She couldn't stop it, and she's haunted by it, regrets it every day of her life, and she just wishes she could take it all back. And y'all, she was so convincing, just absolutely convincing, that I truly believed that she was innocent. She had somehow gotten mixed up with the wrong crowd, was wrongly convicted. And I started brainstorming in my head, like, how can I raise awareness about this and help her get out? Little did I know, in my naivety, that this young lady was a psychopath. She was very cunning, very manipulative, and the small, mousy, timid, soft-spoken thing was very much a calculated tactic to be a wolf in sheep's clothing. And my time with her started a long season of my life of panic attacks and nightmares, and I'm going to tell you more about that in part 2. I spent a weekend with one of the most notorious killers in Texas, part 2. Trigger warning, this video does include descriptions of graphic violence. So after I'd spent about an hour alone with Erin Caffey listening to her tell her version of the night of the crime, I had become genuinely convinced that she was innocent and had been wrongfully convicted. I was almost even outraged that she was there. I was like, what idiots put this poor, tiny little thing behind bars with all these adult criminals? But y'all, in a split second, the entire energy of the room changed. Erin was sitting across the table from me. Her shoulders were slumped forward and her head was down, and she was just kind of talking to me like this. And then all of a sudden, I'm leaning in, trying to hear her, and she does this. She locks eyes with me, and my stomach drops. Now, I told you in part 1 that she was a sheep in wolf's clothing. Well, I'll tell you, in that second, the wolf showed up in her eyes. The hairs on the back of my neck stood straight up, and I had this horrible, just sick feeling that, like, I'm in a predatory environment now. I finished the session with her, trying to keep my cool, even though at this point my body is just crawling with the creeps, you know. And I finished the session. I leave the prison, get in my car, and I go to my hotel room for the night. And I just sit in that hotel bed just processing, you know, what did I see? And I told you I still had that rule for myself that I don't look up the crimes of people I work with. And I didn't. I rolled over, watched a little TV, and I fell asleep. But I didn't stay asleep long, y'all. I was woken up by this horrific panic attack. I'd had a nightmare about her eyes, those eyes, those dark, black, shark eyes looking at me. I had a dream about her face contorting and just evil surrounding me and being in the room with me. So I broke my rule. I looked her up, and it turns out that Erin Caffey organized, masterminded, and participated in the slaughter of her family. Her 2 elementary school-aged brothers were murdered with swords. Her mother, Penny, was shot multiple times and was nearly beheaded with the same sword. Her father, Terry, was shot multiple times, including several rounds to the face, but he actually survived the attack. Erin and her 3 accomplices lit the house on fire and fled the scene, and they were found and arrested the next day. And as for how it personally affected me, I truly believe that something dark and evil followed me home from the prison that night, and it stayed with me for years after that. I was haunted by night terrors, by nightmares, panic attacks, sleep paralysis, shadow figures. Not everybody can say that they have genuinely looked into the face of evil and had it look back into you, but I did, and it has never left me.
In this, we then see Finn waking up after getting beaten terribly bad.